the whole thing was in 2019, I started posting a little bit on Instagram just for fun and talking science. In 2020, the pandemic hit and Rob was going to represent me for my book, but he was like, look, the book thing is kind of slowing down now, but people are going on podcasts. They're going remotely. Some people are still having them in person. Maybe just go. So I was like, all right, cool. So I started going on podcasts and I was like really excited about it because at the time, the world was kind of falling apart psychologically. And I thought, I'm not going to get into this whole vaccine thing. That's a barbed wire tangle. And also, by the way, I was forbidden from talking about it. There were rules that Stanford put forth. And also, it's not my expertise. But what I do know about, because my lab works on, is anxiety, tools to overcome anxiety, sleep, circadian rhythm, how to get your sleep right, exercise, physical health, mental health. So I'm like, okay, I can be of value and go on these podcasts and just teach and share. And I felt great doing it. And I wasn't selling anything. Yeah. I had no go-to
Did you
purchase.
ever teach in a classroom environment at any point?
I did. So as soon as I got my job at UC San Diego, I started teaching. I actually taught more than I was required to. I started a course called Neural Circuits in Health and Disease. And it looked a lot like the podcast. And it started with 50 students the first year and it ended with 450 students. And it was taught at night. I liked teaching.
Was it fun?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I'd bring Costello, my bulldog, and he loved it because he'd have this harem of people like petting him and giving him salami and stuff. And I loved teaching at night because I always find that the students are more relaxed at night. And we would explore papers and it was a bit more free form. And I never thought it would become a podcast. But even as a graduate student, I took opportunities to teach. And I taught a summer course as a postdoc and as a junior faculty member at Cold Spring Harbor in Long Island, just summer camp for scientists. I ran a course on visual neuroscience.
It seems like you were meant to do this. Like you're hardwired to do this job.
To learn and teach,
Yeah, there's so many people who teach, but it's not their strength. Maybe they're connected to the subject they're teaching, but you seem to really be connected to the act of teaching.
I love teaching. I love learning and teaching. Yeah. For me, the podcast is pure delight because it's go learn stuff, talk to experts in the field, look at the literature, form my own opinions too, learn it and teach it. And the world gets it for free if they have an internet connection. And yes, we have sponsors, sure, but they get paid if people want to buy the stuff and you don't have to. It's like the perfect ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So to me, the DIY thing made sense. Lex is like, start a podcast. So I went to Rob and said, I want to start a podcast. And he was already doing a podcast called The Fight with Teddy Atlas. Rob's an interesting guy. He was working in PR in New York, but he's always liked sports, spectator sports, but he liked boxing and MMA. And he had this thing for Teddy Atlas, old school guy who's a commentator who'd come up. He used to work in Tyson's camp years ago, and he's got a big scar on his face. He's from Staten Island. And he pulled Teddy out of retirement, basically, and they started the Fight with Teddy Atlas podcast, which is they interview fighters before fights, and they talk about the fights that happened last weekend. It's like pure heart for him. He's an interesting guy, Rob. He runs Ironmans and all this stuff. But I'd worked with him for about a year, and I said, what do we need to do a podcast? He said, well, here are the cameras you need. Here are the recording stuff. So I went and got it. I went and bought it. And then I moved to Topanga Canyon. I was teaching remotely. Moved to Topanga Canyon.
Because everyone was teaching remotely at that time.
Everything was remote.
Yeah.
And I loved Topanga. I moved to Topanga because Oliver Sacks, who was a neurologist and a writer, wrote about the brain, lived in Topanga. So I was like, cool.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
And he was really into weightlifting and fitness.
Wow.
And he died in 2015, but I've always admired him. And so I was like, cool, I'm going to move there. And there was a street called Vision Drive, and I work on the visual system. So I'm like, it's fate. So I moved into the old Fleetwood Mac house. It was like a barn.
Cool.
And I put a gym in the main bedroom, my bulldog, and we started the podcast in a closet, literally a closet. And Rob lived up the road. And then Mike Blayback, who did the branding for, photos for DC Skateboarding, Lakai, Girl Skateboards, DGK, done a lot with Supreme, knows Bill Strobick and those guys. He was my friend. I was like, hey, we need a top card. Will you do this? So he took some photos and I told Rob, I was like, we should bring this guy in just so that the photos are the same on every top card. And Rob at first said, yeah, I don't know. Is that like really important? Like, do we need it? And I'm like, trust me, this guy, the branding, like just the look, like even just the font. And he kind of knew what I was talking about, but that wasn't me. I'm like, it's got to look right.
Yeah.
And I don't care if anyone else notices. And then I said, I want a song at the beginning in the bumper up front. And my favorite song is Burning Lights by Joe Strummer. And we tried to get the rights to Burning Lights. It's too expensive. So talked to Mike and he was like, oh, skateboarders have a solution for this. Like you can change a certain number of chords. And then I hope I don't sync myself with the copyright on this one. But anyway,
No, because you changed the
we
right
changed a
amount
few
of
of the
chords.
chords. We had a guy play it, change a few of the chords,
Yeah.
put that up front. And I was like, yes, it's a Strummer song at the beginning. It's got pictures of my favorite science memorabilia.
It's a Strummer-like song.
Strummer-like song,
Let's be
excuse
clear.
me. It's a Strummer-like song at the beginning.
Strummer-inspired.
Strummer-inspired.
Strummer
And
tribute.
Strummer tribute, exactly. Love him. Never met him, but I know him through you, thankfully. I ask so many questions about him whenever I see you. Okay, so it was just pull the guys together, and then we needed to do a bunch of stuff like uploading to RSS feeds and all this stuff like I don't know about. And so I knew this kid at Stanford Media, Ian Mackey. I was like, let's hire Ian. And Rob was like, I don't know, do we really want to bring inside? Boom. Once the four of us got together, perfect chemistry, and we just released in January 21. And the first, 6 months, it literally felt like it was just like pouring out of me because I've been carrying all this stuff for a long time and I'd gone on podcasts. But the moment I sat down, it was just like, all right, let's learn about sleep and circadian rhythms. Let's learn about dreaming. Let's learn about testosterone and estrogen. Because I'd worked on endocrine stuff. I'd worked on thermal regulation. So hormone stuff, cold, neuroscience stuff. I mean, all been in here. And I just, like that kid with the grunt with the Tourette's thing, I was just like, just, and I don't even remember feeling like it was ever work.